At 8:17 on a Thursday night, while rain ticked against the tall front windows of the Ashford house in Westchester County, like someone with a private grudge, Nora Vale stood in the dark foyer with her hand still on the brass knob and listened to her husband laugh in a way she had not heard in months. It was not his public laugh, not the polished one he used at fundraisers or zoning meetings or steak dinners with bankers. This one was younger, loose, intimate. It floated down from his study with the amber light under the door and the low hum of old jazz he only played when he wanted to feel like the smartest man in the room. Nora did not call out. She set her wet umbrella carefully into the stand, slipped off her heels, and moved soundlessly over the runner rug, every nerve in her body sharpening with the ugly instinct that arrives before the mind is willing to name it. The study door was not fully closed. Through the narrow gap she saw half the room first. The bar cart, the shelves of legal biographies, the framed campaign photo from the year Grant Vale helped elect the county executive and started saying "we" at dinner when he meant men like him. Then she saw his hand. It was resting on the bare knee of Councilwoman Elise Tarrant, 38, camera ready, married on paper but rumored not to be on speaking terms with her husband, and wearing the kind of white silk blouse that looked expensive because it was meant to look effortless. Grant sat close beside her on the leather sofa, instead of behind his desk. There were 2 whiskey glasses on the table. Elise was smiling, but not fully. Grant leaned in and murmured something into her hair. Then he kissed her. Nora felt the world narrow with such force it was almost clean. There was no dramatic gasp, no dropped bag, no crash of a vase. Her first thought was absurdly practical, so that's why he changed cologne. Her second thought came with a heat so sudden she had to press her nails into her palm. She pushed the door open. Grant jerked back so fast his glass tipped and struck the carpet. Elise stood up at once, smoothing her blouse, face drained of all campaign warmth. For one suspended beat, the 3 of them looked at one another, with the hideous clarity of people who know there is no language large enough for the moment. Nora's voice, when it came, was steady enough to frighten even her. "I was in the car for 20 minutes trying to decide whether to come in and pretend I still had a marriage worth protecting." Grant rose. "Nora, don't." She lifted one finger. Rain hissed beyond the windows. Somewhere upstairs, the old house settled with a faint groan. Elise grabbed her purse. "I should go." Nora turned toward her with the smallest smile. The kind women learn when they are done begging for dignity and ready to weaponize it. "You absolutely should. And Councilwoman? You may want to use the side door. The front walkway camera uploads to the cloud." Elise froze. Grant stared at Nora, then toward the security monitor built into the wall cabinet, and she saw the moment his mind began its frantic calculations. Not shame, strategy. That told her almost everything she needed to know. Elise left without another word, heels clicking fast over the hardwood. Then the side door opened and shut. Grant stepped around the table with his palms slightly out, the posture of a man who believed every disaster still contained a negotiation. "This is not what you think." Nora actually laughed. It came out brittle and low. "That sentence should be retired by Congress." He exhaled hard through his nose. "It's been over between us for a while." "Then why was I still sitting beside you at charity galas smiling like an accessory?" "Because appearances matter." "To you," she said. "To the company. To your father." At that, his expression shifted, and there it was, the real center of gravity in the Vale family. Not love, not even desire, power. Vale Civic Group, founded by the old man, Martin Vale. 50 years of contracts, concrete, municipal favors, public-private deals, and enough polished philanthropy to disguise the smell of coercion under all that cedar and money. Nora folded her arms. "How long?" Grant looked away. "Long enough to embarrass me, or long enough to ruin you?" He did not answer. His silence was its own confession. She took one step into the study and saw an envelope on the desk, with Martin's handwriting on the front. Heavy black ink, old-fashioned, severe, for Grant. There was also a red light blinking on Grant's phone. Recording app. Active. Grant moved too quickly, reaching for it, but Nora was faster. She snatched the phone from the desk and held it away from him. "Give me that." "Why is your phone recording?" she asked. "Board notes." "With your mistress in the room?" His jaw tightened. "Nora." She tapped the screen. The waveform pulsed. 32 minutes and 14 seconds. A fresh recording. Grant lunged once, not violently but desperately, and she stepped back. In that single scramble, the phone slipped from her fingers, hit the edge of the desk, and skidded under the chair. Both of them stopped. He stared at the dark space beneath the seat as if it contained a live explosive. That reaction was wrong. Too sharp. Too afraid. Nora crouched, reached under, and pulled it out. Grant's face had gone pale in a way that had nothing to do with being caught. She looked at the screen again, then at him. What's on this? Nothing that concerns you. That sentence, Nora said quietly, is how men lose houses. She pressed play. For a second, there was only the rustle of fabric and the clink of ice. Then Martinvale's voice came through the phone speaker, older and roughened by bourbon, but unmistakable. If she asks, the land was appraised before the county route changed, and nobody tells the girl from planning a damn thing until after the vote. Grant made a strangled sound and reached again. Nora held up her hand without looking at him. Martin's voice continued. And if Ben keeps whining about Dad doing things the right way, remind him whose debt got paid off when he crashed that Tesla into the retaining wall. Elisa's voice, smaller than Nora expected. You can't threaten him forever. A pause. Ice again. Then Grant, cool and flat. I don't need forever. I need Tuesday. Nora stopped the recording. For one long moment, no one moved. Outside, tires hissed past on the wet road below the hill. She turned her head slowly toward her husband. What vote? Grant's eyes fixed on hers, and for the first time that night she saw that he was genuinely afraid. Delete it. She almost smiled. Now I'm interested. Upstairs, a door opened. Their 17-year-old son, Owen, called down. Mom? Nora did not raise her voice. Go back to your room. The silence that followed held. Then the door shut again. Grant lowered his tone. This isn't just about us. No, Nora said. It never was. She slipped the phone into the pocket of her coat. Grant stared at the pocket like he could burn through wool by force of will. You don't understand what you're holding. Then explain it to me. Not here. Because the walls have ears? Because this family built half the county and bugged the rest? She moved toward the hall. He caught her wrist. Not hard, but enough. She looked down at his hand. He released her. If you go public with that recording, he said, you blow up everything. The company. The council deal. My father. Owen's future. Yours. Nora tilted her head. You put my future on your sofa with a councilwoman and expect me to protect yours? She left him standing in the study and went upstairs, each step feeling both unreal and brutally specific beneath her bare feet. On the landing, she stopped outside Owen's room, gathered herself, then kept walking. She knew better than to drag a child into the first blast wave. In her bedroom, she locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, still wearing her damp coat, listening to her heart hammer against her ribs. There should have been tears. There were none. Her mind was moving too fast. A council vote. A land appraisal. Planning. Tuesday. Ben. Debt. Her brother-in-law. And Martin at the center, as always, pulling strings with one hand and blessing grandchildren with the other. The Vallas did not merely lie. They organized lies. They budgeted them. Nora took out the phone again and replayed the audio. Lower this time, holding the speaker close. There was more in the background than words. A chair scraping. A door opening. Then, near the end, another voice barely audible, male, tense. Somebody's gonna look at the permits. Grant again, sharper. Then we make sure they're looking at the wrong file. Nora stopped it and stared at the rain on the window. 3 years ago, before the dinner parties became battlefield theater and before Grant started sleeping on business trips that never appeared on invoices, she would have convinced herself this could be managed, handled quietly. Protect the family, protect Owen, but something inside her had been eroding for too long, and tonight, the rot was visible. Across town, in a condo above a shuttered furniture store on Mamaroneck Avenue, Ben Vale was opening his third beer and pretending not to hear his phone buzz on the kitchen counter. He had spent the last 18 months learning the anatomy of exclusion. First from the company, where Martin decided Ben lacked discipline. Then from the family trust discussions, where Grant always said soon in the voice people use for terminally inconvenient dogs. Ben was 42, broad-shouldered, handsome in the faded way of men who had once been the charming son of a powerful family and now looked like they slept in yesterday's arguments. His divorce papers were clipped beneath a utility bill. A campaign flyer for Elise Tarrant sat under a takeout menu because irony, at this point, was basically interior design. The phone kept buzzing. Finally, he crossed the kitchen, checked the screen, and saw Nora's name. That alone made him straighten. She never called him directly unless Christmas seating had become political. He answered on the fourth ring. Nora? Her voice was controlled, which made it worse. Are you alone? Ben glanced at the muted television, the rain-streaked glass door to the balcony, the empty room. Yeah. A pause. He could hear her breathing. Did Martin pay off a debt for you after a crash? Ben's mouth went dry. He leaned a hand on the counter. What? Answer me. Who told you that? Did he? Ben stared into the dark microwave window and saw his own reflection going still. It was years ago. How much? Enough, he waited. Nora, what is this? She did not answer directly. If I send you something, you do not call your brother. You do not call your father. You listen, and then you tell me whether this is zoning fraud, bribery, or all of the above. Ben let out one humorless breath. Jesus. That bad? In this family, that vague. When the file came through, Ben played it once, then again, sitting down slowly at the kitchen table, as if his legs had become optional equipment. By the second playback, he was no longer hearing a scandal. He was hearing architecture. Tuesday meant the county subcommittee vote on the Rivergate redevelopment parcel, 60 acres near the water, that Vail Civic Group had been trying to control for months under the language of mixed-use revitalization and public access. What nobody in the papers had connected, because nobody outside the circle had the map overlays, was that the route change would multiply the adjacent warehouse land value overnight. Warehouse land owned through shell entities. Ben knew because Martin had once gotten drunk enough to boast that the smartest ownership was ownership no voter could pronounce. He rubbed his face hard. Nora stayed silent on the line until he spoke. This isn't just a councilwoman sleeping with your husband, he said. This is payoff territory. And the permits? Could be code violations buried under expedited review. Could be procurement fraud. Could be both. Would Grant know? Ben looked at the audio file on his phone like it might spread. Grant doesn't breathe without knowing where the air came from. Back in the Vail house, Nora went to Owen's door and found him awake, sitting cross-legged on his bed, with headphones around his neck, and his geometry book open but untouched. He had Grant's eyes and Nora's restraint, which was not a fair inheritance for a boy his age. He looked up once. Are you and Dad fighting? Nora leaned against the doorframe, suddenly tired in her bones. Your father and I are having an adult problem. Owen studied her face. Teenagers could smell dishonesty with almost scientific accuracy. Is he in trouble? She hesitated just long enough. Owen noticed. Of course he did. Mom. She went in and sat on the edge of the desk chair, hands clasped. I need you to do something for me. Tonight, you stay in this room unless there's a fire. You lock your door. You call me if anyone tells you anything dramatic or asks you questions. He frowned. Who would ask me questions? I don't know yet. He pulled one knee up. That's not reassuring. Nora almost smiled despite herself. It's not meant to be. Downstairs, she heard the study door open, then footsteps moving through the hall. Not leaving. Pacing. Grant, trapped in his own house by optics and calculation. Owen watched her. Did Grandpa do something? The question landed so cleanly it chilled her. Why would you ask that? He shrugged, but his mouth tightened. Because every time Dad gets weird, Grandpa's involved. Nora looked at her son in the warm desk lamp glow, at the posters, the laundry chair, the ordinary life pressed inside walls, built with compromised money, and felt something clarifying move through her. Not courage, exactly. More like the end of pretending. Get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow may be loud. In the kitchen, she found Grant standing by the island with both hands braced on the marble, staring at nothing. The overhead pendants cast pale circles on the counter. He did not look up when she entered. Ben knows? He asked. Ben listens better than you do. Grant gave a tight nod, absorbing the damage. You think he won't use this against my father? I think your father taught all of you to sharpen knives at the dinner table. You have no idea what Martin is capable of. Nora moved to the sink, poured herself water, and drank half the glass before answering. That is the first honest thing you've said tonight. He finally looked at her. There was anger there, yes, but underneath it a kind of exhaustion she had not seen before, as if he had spent years carrying a machine he no longer knew how to put down. I never wanted you in this part of it. Then, you should have kept your mistresses and your crimes in separate rooms. The hit landed. He flinched almost invisibly. I'm trying to keep this from turning into a bloodbath. Nora set the glass down very gently. Grant, sweetheart, the bloodbath was your family business model. I'm just the woman who opened the ledger. His phone buzzed on the counter. Both of them looked at it. Martin Vail. Grant let it ring once, twice, then answered on speaker by accident or design. Nora could not tell. Martin's voice came through like gravel in a tumbler. Get over here. Grant said nothing. Martin continued, already irritated. Elise just called me half hysterical. She says Nora saw something. Tell me exactly what she has. Nora and Grant locked eyes across the island, the whole house seeming to still around them. Then Nora reached over, pressed the speaker button so Martin could hear the room more clearly, and said in a calm voice that surprised even her, Good evening, Martin. I have enough. The silence on the line was so complete it had weight. Good evening, Martin. I have enough. On the other end of the line, the The old man did not speak for 2 full seconds, and in the Vale family 2 seconds of silence could feel more threatening than a scream. Nora watched Grant's throat move as he swallowed. The kitchen lights reflected in the black marble, in the glass fruit bowl, in the dark window over the sink where her own face hovered pale and sharp over the wet blur of the backyard. Then Martin gave one short exhale, almost a laugh, but meaner. "Nora," he said, with that false softness men like him reserved for witnesses and priests, "you sound upset." She leaned one hip against the counter and folded her free arm across herself, not from cold but to keep from pacing. "That is a very elegant word for it. Put Grant on the car and come here. We'll talk like adults." "We are talking now." Martin's voice hardened by a degree. "This is family business." Nora looked at Grant. He stood very still, shoulders locked, one hand flattened to the counter as though steadying himself on a moving train. "No," she said. "Family business is what you call corruption after dessert." Grant shut his eyes. Martin did not raise his voice. He never needed to. "You should think very carefully before you start using words you can't take back. You should think very carefully before threatening me in my own kitchen." She heard the tiny shift of his breathing, heard him recalculate, and understood with a cold certainty that she was no longer speaking as a daughter-in-law who had embarrassed the household. She was speaking as a variable, a risk, something to be contained. "Come over," Martin said again. "Now." Nora ended the call. The silence that followed was enormous. Grant stared at the phone in her hand as if she had just thrown a lit match into gasoline. "What the hell did you do?" She placed the phone on the island. "I declined an invitation." "You just escalated this." "It was escalated when your father started burying public records, and you started sleeping with a city councilwoman." Grant raked both, hands through his hair and turned away, jaw tight, pacing once toward the fridge and back like a man walking the perimeter of a cell. "You do not understand how he works when he feels cornered." "Then educate me." "He doesn't lose gracefully." "Neither do I." He stopped and looked at her, truly looked, and something in his face altered. Maybe it was the realization that this version of his wife had been forming for years, while he mistook endurance for obedience. Maybe it was simply fear. "Nora," he said. Lower now, trying another angle. "The one that used to work. Listen to me. Whatever you think this is, it's not just fraud and permits. There are lenders involved, political donors, labor agreements, contracts with penalty triggers. If this gets out wrong, it doesn't just hit my father, it hits everyone tied to the project. Hundreds of workers, families, vendors. You burn this down, you don't get to choose where the ash lands." She studied him for a long moment. In another life, maybe that argument would have reached her first, before anger, before disgust. Public good tangled around private theft. American corruption was always dressed in the language of jobs. "You almost sound sincere," she said. "I am sincere. About the workers, or about protecting your own board seat." The muscle in his cheek jumped. He had no answer fast enough, and that was answer enough. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. "Ben." She took it out. Grant's eyes tracked the screen and sharpened. "Don't." She answered anyway. "Tell me." Ben's voice was rough and fast, the rhythm of a man already putting on shoes while thinking. "I called a guy I know at the county clerk's office. Off the record. Root amendment documents were refiled this afternoon under a revised parcel label. That's not normal. And Nora, there's more. The shell ownership on the adjacent warehouse lots loops through a holding company in Delaware, then lands in a trust manager tied to Martin's estate lawyer." Grant made a sound under his breath and turned away again. Nora kept her eyes on him. "Meaning?" "Meaning your father-in-law stands to make a fortune if Tuesday's vote goes through, and the traffic redirection gets approved before the public valuation catches up." Ben paused. "And if Elise has been leaning on planning staff to speed it through, that's abuse of office territory," Nora said. "Could Grant be exposed personally?" Grant spun around. "Jesus Christ." Ben heard him. "He's right there?" "Yes." "Then here's the part he won't say out loud," Ben said. "If his name is on any internal communication that acknowledges the real ownership, he's inside the blast radius." Nora let the sentence settle between them. Grant took one step forward. "Ben, you don't know what you're talking about." Ben laughed once, tired and bitter. "That's rich, coming from the brother who's been speaking for the family since Dad decided my usefulness depreciated." Nora asked, "What happens if the recording reaches the press?" Grant moved toward her. "Hang up." She held up her hand, and he stopped, breathing hard through his nose. Ben answered first. "Depends which press. Local paper gets buried, delayed, negotiated. State investigative desk with the right timing could trigger subpoenas. Federal, if procurement money crossed the wrong lines." The word federal hung in the kitchen like a draft. Nora lowered herself onto one of the bar stools because suddenly the room felt tilted. Her bare foot touched the cold rung, and the ordinary sensation steadied her. "Would anyone believe me?" she asked. Ben's tone changed. Less tactical. More human. They'd believe the audio. She looked down at her hand, at the crescent marks her own nails had left in her skin upstairs. And Owen? That took longer. Ben exhaled slowly. Owen would survive the truth better than the lie, but he won't forgive the same people for both. After she ended the call, Grant stood with both palms braced on the island again, head bowed. The rain had eased outside, leaving only a wet hush and the intermittent drip from the gutter by the mudroom. Somewhere the refrigerator compressor clicked on. The house seemed offensively normal. "You called Ben before you called a lawyer," Grant said without looking up. "That should tell you how little I trust your world." He gave a thin, humorless smile and finally lifted his head. "You think Ben is outside my world? He's been trying to get back into it since the day Dad cut him off. That doesn't make him wrong." "No," Grant said. "It makes him dangerous." Nora slid off the stool and walked to the sink again. Not because she wanted water, but because movement kept her from breaking apart too soon. She stared out at the dark backyard, where the wet cedar fence shone under the motion light, and the children's old swing at the far end moved slightly in the wind. Owen had outgrown it years ago, but Grant had never taken it down. Symbolism without maintenance, very on brand. "Tell me everything," she said. "Now." Grant was quiet. She turned. He had removed his tie and stood there with the top button of his shirt open, suddenly less like a civic prince and more like a tired man in his 40s who had built his life around the assumption that consequences were negotiable. "The Rivergate parcel was dead 2 years ago," he said. "Environmental concerns, traffic blowback, too many stakeholders. Then the county changed leadership, and suddenly there was appetite for redevelopment if someone could sell it as jobs, housing, river access, the usual package. Dad wanted it because he never loses a piece of land once he's imagined his name on the plaque." He paused, watching her face as if checking whether she still recognized the language. She did. She had sat through enough fundraisers to know that public benefit was always the wrapping paper. "The adjacent warehouse parcels were undervalued because the access roads were terrible," he went on. "If the route shifts, the land multiplies. But Martin couldn't buy directly without attracting attention, so entities were layered. Quietly. Legally adjacent to legal. That is not a phrase. It is in this county." He gave a bleak smile that vanished immediately. Planning started asking questions about sequence. Whether the route revision should be disclosed before the vote. Elise said she could manage the committee chatter. Then, one of the junior planners flagged the permit packet discrepancies. "The girl from planning," Nora said. "Her name is Talia Mercer." He looked almost surprised she had caught it. "Yes. And you plan to keep her quiet until after the vote." Grant looked away. "I planned to keep the process moving. You were on that recording. I was in the room. Same thing." He inhaled sharply, then let it out with visible effort. "Do you think I'm proud of any of this?" Nora stared at him. "You're asking the wrong woman for absolution." Footsteps sounded overhead. Light, hesitant. Owen. Both of them looked up at once. Then the footsteps stopped. A bedroom door closed softly again. Grant's eyes remained on the ceiling for a second too long. When he looked back at Nora, there was something stripped down in his expression that made him seem, for the first time in years, like the young attorney she had married before Martin taught him that affection was a weakness and ambiguity was a weapon. "I told myself I could keep us insulated," he said quietly. "From him. From all of it. That if I stayed close enough to the machinery, I could guide where it crushed." Nora let the silence answer first. "That's how men explain becoming the machinery." The doorbell rang. Both of them jolted. Not a polite tap. A long, decisive press. Grant checked the time automatically. 9:06. Too late for neighbors. Too direct for friends. The bell rang again. Nora's body went alert with a precise animal fear. Grant moved toward the foyer, and she caught his arm. "Who is it?" "Probably security." "We don't have security." "Dad does." He gently but firmly removed her hand and crossed the hallway. Nora followed as far as the kitchen threshold, staying back from the sidelights. Through the frosted glass panel beside the front door, two shapes stood under the porch lantern. Broad shoulders, dark coats. Not police. Not yet. Grant opened the inner door but left the storm door latched. One of the men spoke first. "Mr. Vale, your father asked us to bring you over." Grant's tone changed, polished and cool. "Tell my father I have a car." The second man, older, with a shaved head and the compact stillness of someone used to making people move, angled his head slightly to glance past Grant into the house. Nora stepped farther out, letting herself be seen. "Did Martin send chauffeurs or witnesses?" The man's gaze flicked to her, unreadable. "Ma'am, we're just here to assist." "That word has had a terrible night," she said. Grant did not turn around, but his shoulders tightened. "I'm not coming," he said. "You can go." The shaved-head man gave a tiny shrug. "Mr. Vale asked us not to return without clarity." Nora almost laughed at the phrasing. That was Martin all over. Threats wrapped in executive diction. "Here's clarity," she said. "Get off my porch." The men exchanged one look. Then the older one nodded once. "Have a good evening." They stepped back into the rain-dark drive, and Grant shut the door harder than necessary. Through the window, Nora watched their black SUV idle at the curb instead of pulling away. "He's not even pretending," she said. "No," Grant replied. "He usually doesn't, once the family part stops working." He went to the sideboard drawer, took out the bourbon, poured a glass, then set it down untouched. His hand was shaking. That, more than anything, chilled her. Grant did not shake. Not at funerals, not during depositions, not when Owen split his chin open at 9 and bled through a towel in the back seat on the way to urgent care. If he was shaking now, then the map in his head had changed. Nora reached for her own phone and texted Ben one line. "2 men outside. Dad escalating." He responded almost immediately. "Leave the house if you can. Do not go to Martin." She stared at the message, then looked up at the staircase. Owen was upstairs. Every plan now had to pass through that fact. "We're not staying here tonight," she said. Grant looked at her, startled. "Where are you going?" "I didn't say we. Owen and I are leaving." He set the glass down. "No." The simplicity of it made her go still. "No? You take him out tonight, and Dad will know you're moving against him. That SUV will follow you. Half the cops in this town have done charity golf with him. You think a traffic stop at the wrong moment can't become a leverage play?" Nora felt rage rise, hot and clarifying. "So your solution is what? We sleep under the same roof while your father posts guards at the curb?" "My solution," he snapped, then lowered his voice immediately, glancing upstairs, "is that you stop acting like panic is strategy." "Panic?" she repeated, almost whispering from disbelief. "I caught you with another woman, found evidence of public corruption, and now your father has sent men to my porch. But yes, Grant, maybe I'm being emotional." The word landed where she meant it to. He shut his eyes, ashamed for a fraction of a second. "That's not what I meant. It's what you said." They stood facing each other across the foyer rug, the house smelling faintly of lemon polish, wet wool, and the smoke from the fireplace that had burned earlier in the evening when this was still a marriage with furniture. Finally, Grant said, "You can hate me tomorrow. Tonight, I need you to listen. If you disappear with Owen, Dad assumes you're going to press or law enforcement. He goes from pressure to war. He starts freezing accounts, leaning on school connections, contacting divorce counsel before breakfast. Maybe worse. If you stay until morning, I can get ahead of him." Nora studied his face, searching for manipulation, for the old polished charm. What she saw instead was a terrible sincerity shaped by bad instincts. He might be telling the truth. That did not make him safe. It only made the trap more accurately described. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Owen was listening. She knew he was. Children always know the architecture of their own homes in crisis. "I need 10 minutes alone," she said. "No calls. No one comes in. If anyone from outside sets foot on this property, I call the police and use your father's name first." Grant gave one restrained nod. 10 minutes. She climbed the stairs slowly, feeling every tread under her feet, feeling the old ache in her chest that had less to do with betrayal than with the collapse of structure. She entered the bedroom, locked the door again, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dim light from the hallway spill. Her phone buzzed once more. "Ben, I'm coming over." She typed back, "Don't. Too visible. Need another option." Then she stared at the screen until a new message appeared from an unknown number. No name, no introduction, just a photograph. It showed a manila folder spread open on what looked like a conference table, and on top of the stack was a cover sheet stamped County Internal Review with a yellow note attached in block handwriting. "Ask Grant why Talia went missing after this." Nora felt the blood drain from her face so fast she had to grip the mattress. There was a second message before she could think. "If you want the truth, don't trust Ben either. If you want the truth, don't trust Ben either." Nora read the message 3 times, each pass making the letters feel less like language and more like pressure applied directly to the center of her chest. The bedroom was too quiet. Down the hall, a faucet clicked somewhere in the plumbing, and rainwater still slipped from the eaves outside in an uneven rhythm that made the night feel patient, as though it could wait forever for people to ruin themselves. She enlarged the photograph with her thumb. The folder edges were soft with handling. There were at least 6 documents beneath the cover sheet. On the left margin of one page, she could make out a line of typed text, Mercer, T. On another, blurred but legible enough, the words Site Compliance Review. Nora's mind snatched at the ugliest part first. Missing. Not resigned. Not transferred. Missing. Her breathing shortened. She forced it down, inhaling through her nose until the air stopped scraping. Then the next wave came. Don't trust Ben either. That had the flavor of a family war, the kind Martin favored, where truth was never offered cleanly if it could be sharpened on both ends. She typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly. Ask Ben where he was the night Talia's car was found. Nora stared at the screen until her eyes stung. Then she locked the phone, unlocked it again, and checked the number. No name. Local area code. Disposable. Maybe. Maybe not. She stood up too quickly, paced to the window, and pulled the curtain edge aside with 2 fingers. The black SUV still idled at the curb, headlights off, shape slick with rain under the street lamp. A second vehicle she had not noticed before, a gray sedan, was parked half a block down. Maybe a neighbor, maybe not. Her thoughts kept trying to run ahead into melodrama, and she yanked them back. Evidence first, breathing first. She opened the bedroom door and crossed the hall to Owen's room. He was exactly where she had expected him to be, sitting at his desk now instead of his bed, one earbud in, pretending to scroll on his phone with the doomed transparency of a 17-year-old who believed posture could hide panic. He looked up the instant she entered. "You're pale," he said. Nora closed the door behind her. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." His shoulders tightened. Okay. She hated herself for what came next. Hated the way crisis turned mothers into investigators. "Has your grandfather ever asked you about my schedule? Or told you not to mention something to me?" Owen frowned, caught off guard. "What kind of something?" "Anything. Meetings. Visitors. Your father's travel. People coming by the house." He leaned back a little, face changing as memory moved through him. "Last month he asked if you were still meeting that woman from legal at the club. I thought he meant something for the foundation." "What woman from legal?" "I don't know. I never met her." He said, "Your mother still having those little lunches with counsel? Like it was a joke." Nora felt the room shift. 3 weeks ago, she had met privately with Dana Rusk, a family law attorney recommended by a friend from Rye, not because she had decided to leave Grant, but because she wanted to know how trapped she was if she ever did. She had told no one, not even Ben. "Did you tell him?" Owen's expression hardened at once, offended. "No. I said I didn't know what he was talking about." She exhaled. "Okay." He watched her more closely now. "Mom, what is happening?" She sat on the edge of his bed. His room smelled faintly of detergent, old books, and the cedar blocks she had tucked into drawers years ago because moths had gotten into the winter sweaters. All these small domestic acts, all this labor of making a home, and downstairs men were treating the house like a boardroom annex. "Your grandfather has been watching this family more closely than I realized," she said. "And someone just sent me a message about a woman named Talia Mercer." Owen blinked. "The planner?" Nora stared. "You know that name?" He immediately regretted it. She saw it in the way his jaw set. "Only from Dad. Once." "When?" "A few weeks ago. He was on speaker in the car without realizing it. Grandpa said something like, 'Has the Mercer problem gone away yet?' Dad told him not to talk about it in front of me." Owen gave a harsh little laugh, which obviously makes a teenager less curious. Nora felt a chill slide up her spine. "Did your father say anything else?" "Just that she was spooked and temporary. I thought it was work garbage." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Mom, is somebody dead?" The bluntness of it made her close her eyes for a beat. "I don't know." When she opened them, he was watching her with a seriousness no teenager should have to wear. "Should we call the police?" The question sat between them, clean and frightening. "Not yet," she said, hating the answer as she gave it. "Why not?" "Because I don't know what's true, and because if we move wrong, your grandfather will know before the call connects." Owen swore softly under his breath. More adult than child in that moment. He stood and began pacing the narrow strip of floor between the desk and closet, hands opening and closing. "I always knew Grandpa was a creep," he muttered. "I didn't know he was movie villain creepy." Despite everything, Nora almost smiled. Life is usually less cinematic and more paperwork. "That is not helping." He stopped. "What about Uncle Ben?" There it was. She heard the message in her head again. "Don't trust Ben either. Ask Ben where he was the night Talia's car was found." "I don't know about him either," she admitted. Owen stared. "Seriously?" "Seriously." He sank onto the desk chair and dragged both hands through his hair, exactly like his father when cornered. And the resemblance hurt her more than usual. So the family is basically a crime podcast now. That is an unkind thing to say about podcasts. He gave one unwilling, breathless huff of laughter, then looked at her again, frightened all over. What do we do? Nora's phone buzzed in her hand. Ben. She considered sending it to voicemail. Instead, she answered on speaker and set the phone on Owen's comforter so both of them could hear. Talk carefully. Ben did not waste time. I found something else. A police report on an abandoned vehicle near Saxon Mill Road from 6 weeks ago. Female registered owner. Plate partially redacted in the public version, but enough characters line up with Talia Mercer's registration history, if I'm reading the clerk's archive correctly. Nora closed her fingers around the bedspread. Abandoned? Car found unlocked. Purse inside. Phone missing. Owen went very still. Ben continued. Voice lower now. No foul play conclusion in the file I can see. Just referral and follow-up marked incomplete. Why would it be incomplete? Nora asked. Because this county buries awkward things for sport, or because someone pushed it aside. Hard to say which is more traditional. She took a breath. Ben, where were you the night Talia's car was found? Silence. Owen looked at her sharply. On the line, the sound of traffic and Ben's breathing. Then, who told you to ask me that? Answer. Ben let out a curse, quiet and angry. I was with someone. Who? Another pause, and now she could hear the calculation. That was what did it. Not the pause itself, the calculation inside it. Ben, his voice roughened. A woman named Carla Mendez. She bartends at the Shoreline Grill. Or bartended then. I was there until after midnight. And yes, that's embarrassing. And yes, my divorce lawyer had opinions, but I did not touch that woman or her car. Nora pressed her fingertips to her temple. Why would someone point me at you? Because Dad needs suspects lying around the house. Because Grant has probably spent years telling himself I'm the designated screw-up, and narratives stick. Because I used to do collections work for one of Dad's subcontractors when cash got tight, which, before you ask, I deeply regret. He exhaled hard. Nora, listen to me. If Talia vanished into this mess, then the recording you have is only the top layer. Owen spoke before Nora could. Uncle Ben, did Grandpa ever use Dad to clean things up? Ben was silent for a beat, startled that Owen was there. Kid, you shouldn't be on this call. Too late. Ben gave a strained sigh. Your father was the son who could turn a felony into a committee memo if he had to. That's not an accusation. That's family lore with cufflinks. Nora shut her eyes. When she opened them, Owen's face had gone hard. That scared her more than tears would have. Ben, she said, I got a photo of an internal review file with Talia's name on it. Whoever sent it says, if I want the truth, I shouldn't trust you either. Then whoever sent it wants you isolated. Or warned. Maybe both, he said. Did they identify themselves? No. Then don't answer any more questions. Don't forward anything. Metadata can expose you if they're not idiots. That was practical enough to sound sincere. Also, practical enough to sound rehearsed. Nora hated this stage of truth, when every useful sentence could belong equally to innocence or guilt. I need a safe place to think, she said. Ben answered immediately. Don't go to a hotel. Dad checks them when people around him panic. Go somewhere boring. Somewhere nobody in this family would ever believe you'd choose. After the call ended, Owen said, that was weirdly good advice. Yes, Nora said, which is not the same thing as proof he deserves trust. She rose and moved to the closet, not fully decided, but pulled forward by the need to act before indecision became surrender. She took out an overnight bag and laid it on the bench. Owen stood too. So we are leaving. I'm considering options. That means yes. He began pulling clothes from drawers with the blunt urgency of youth. Not folding anything. Just grabbing hoodies, jeans, chargers, socks. Nora watched him for a second, her chest tight with something close to grief. Childhood did not end in a grand, noble scene. Sometimes it ended because your son learned how quickly adults could become liabilities. Pack light, she said, and bring your school laptop. Are we still pretending school matters tomorrow? Routine matters even when reality doesn't. He nodded once, accepting the rule because he needed one. Nora crossed to her dresser, took out cash from the envelope she kept hidden beneath old scarves, then her passport, Owen's copy of his birth certificate, a flash drive she used for foundation documents, and finally, the recording phone. She hesitated over her jewelry box, then closed it untouched. Let the house keep its props. Downstairs, a knock sounded. Not at the front door this time, but the side entrance off the mudroom. 3 measured knocks. Then Grant's voice, low and tense, somewhere below. Nora froze. Owen looked at her. "Who is that?" She moved to the bedroom door and opened it just enough to hear. Grant again, sharper now. "You can't come in." A woman replied, muffled but distinct. "I'm not here for hospitality. I'm here because Martin's people just followed me for 9 blocks. Nora went cold. Elise. She stepped into the hallway in time to hear the mudroom door slam against the wall downstairs, then footsteps, wet and hurried, entering the kitchen. Owen was already behind her. "Stay here," she whispered. "Absolutely not. Owen." "Mom." His voice was low, but immovable. There it was again, the age she could no longer deny him. They went down together, quickly but quietly, and stopped on the last 3 steps. Elise Tarrant stood in the kitchen under the pendant lights, rain-speckled hair half loose from whatever neat public style she had started the evening with. White blouse replaced by a navy coat thrown over slacks, mascara faintly smudged at one corner in a way no camera would have permitted. She had one hand on the back of a chair, and the other gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles were pale. Grant stood opposite her, furious and rattled in equal measure. He looked up when he saw Nora and Owen, and whatever he had been about to say died. Elise's gaze went to Nora, then Owen, then back to Nora with something like shame and desperation wrestling in real time. "I didn't know he was home," she said about Owen, which was such a pathetic offering of decency that Nora almost rejected it on sight. "Why are you here?" Nora asked. Elise swallowed. "Because Martin is not trying to calm this down anymore. He's trying to contain it." "Yes, we gathered that from the porch detail." "No," Elise said, and there was genuine fear in her voice now. "You didn't gather all of it." She lifted her phone, thumb trembling once before she steadied it. "My campaign treasurer just called. State Ethics requested records at 9:23. Anonymous complaint with attachments. Internal memos. Scheduling logs. Photos of me entering county offices off calendar. Somebody is feeding them everything." Grant stared. "Who?" Elise looked at him with open contempt. "You tell me. I'm not the family that treats evidence like party favors." Nora crossed the remaining steps into the kitchen. The tile felt cold under her bare feet. Up close, she could smell rain, perfume gone faint, and the metallic edge of adrenaline. "What does this have to do with Talia Mercer?" Elise's face changed instantly. Not surprise, recognition, then resistance. "How do you know that name? Answer me." Grant moved at the same moment. "Elise, don't." Nora turned on him so fast he stopped. "Every time a woman in this story gets close to the truth, one of you tells her not to talk. I'm done with that." Owen stood at the foot of the stairs, rigid, eyes moving between the adults as though memorizing the species. Elise looked at him again, then at Nora, and whatever calculation she had been making shifted under the pressure of being seen by someone too young to politely excuse corruption. She lowered herself slowly into the chair, as if her knees had weakened. "Talia was supposed to revise a site memo," she said. "Nothing illegal on paper, just sequencing language. Delay one disclosure, accelerate another, move public comment behind procedural noise. It happens all the time. I told myself that was all it was." Her laugh was small and ugly. "That's the thing about local power. It comes dressed like normal work, until one day somebody disappears, and you realize your entire career has been dry kindling." Grant said. "Elise." She ignored him. "She came to see me after hours." "Not as a planner. As a terrified woman with copies of permit discrepancies and ownership maps." She said if the Root Amendment passed under current disclosures, the county could be steering public value to private landholders without informed review. "She wanted me to slow the vote." "Did you?" Nora asked. Elise stared at the table. "I tried to stall committee timing. Martin found out. After that, she stopped answering me." Nora felt her stomach tighten. "What did Martin do?" Elise lifted her eyes. "I don't know. But I know what Grant said." The kitchen went perfectly still. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to recede. Grant's face emptied. "Be careful," he said quietly. Elise's mouth trembled once, then set. "The night after Talia came to me, I met Martin and Grant in Martin's office. Martin said she was becoming emotional and might damage good work because she didn't understand the bigger picture," Grant said. "Then we redirect her before she gets righteous in public." Nora looked at her husband, and for one suspended instant the whole marriage split cleanly down its hidden fault line. "Redirect," she repeated. Grant's voice came strained and low. "That is not what you think it means." "No?" Nora asked. "Then what did it mean when her car turned up abandoned?" Owen made a sharp sound. Not quite a word. Grant looked at him, then back at Nora, and the sight of his son there seemed to alter the geometry of the room. Shame came into his face at last, raw and unmistakable. "I did not hurt her," he said. "I told Martin to get her out of county review, to offer her a transfer, a settlement, legal insulation, whatever would keep her from detonating the project before we could manage the fallout. That is what I meant." Nora held his gaze. "And did Martin listen to your version?" Grant did not answer. That silence was worse than any denial. Elise spoke into it, voice thin now with exhaustion. "You want to know why I came here? Because I think I'm next on the sacrifice list. Ethics gets my files, the press gets pictures, Martin blames me for leverage, and Grant pretends he was trying to protect process. I'm done being the woman men use to absorb impact." She opened the notes app on her phone and turned it around. A list of dates, names, file numbers, late-night meeting locations. "I've been keeping my own record since January. Insurance." Nora looked at the screen, then at Elise. The room smelled suddenly of wet fabric, fear, and the bourbon Grant still hadn't touched. Somewhere outside, the SUV engine finally cut off. The silence that followed was different from the others that night. Not stunned, not domestic, not the strained quiet of a marriage splitting open. This one had an edge. Mechanical, almost. Nora heard it in the absence of the idling engine, in the faint tick of cooling metal from outside, in the way Grant's posture changed without him seeming to realize it. He turned his head a fraction toward the dark window over the sink, listening. Elise noticed too. Her fingers tightened around her phone until the tendons in her wrist stood out. Owen took one step backward toward the stairs, then stopped because fear and pride were wrestling in him, and neither wanted to lose in front of the adults. Nora kept her eyes on Grant. Who turns the engine off in front of a house unless they plan to stay? Grant did not answer. He moved toward the mudroom, not fast, but with the compressed focus of a man trying not to look afraid in front of his son. Nora followed. So did Owen, despite the glance she shot him. Elise came last, coat still damp, one arm folded across her middle, as if she were cold only now that she had stopped moving. Grant killed the kitchen lights with one tap. The house dimmed at once, leaving only the under-cabinet glow and the amber lamp in the dining room beyond. Through the narrow mudroom window, they could see the black shape of the SUV at the curb and, just beyond it, the older man with the shaved head stepping out into the wet street. He did not hurry. He closed the door softly and looked up at the house, as though checking whether the place had settled enough to be entered. "Jesus," Elise whispered. Grant unlocked his own phone, swore under his breath, and held it up. No signal bars, Wi-Fi icon gone. Nora looked at hers. "Same." Owen's voice came thin and angry. "Did they jam the signal? Maybe just killed something local," Grant muttered, though he didn't sound convinced. "Or the storm knocked out service." Elise let out one dry, unbelieving laugh. "That's adorable." There was a second figure now, near the curb, moving toward the side hedge line instead of the walkway. Nora felt the back of her neck go cold. "They're not waiting for permission." Grant turned sharply. "Everyone, upstairs, now." "No," Nora said. He looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "This is not the moment." "Exactly. I am not trapping us on the second floor like a bad decision." Her own voice surprised her with how level it was. Panic had moved through her already and left behind something more efficient. "What are the exits?" Grant stared for half a second. Then the old courtroom reflex kicked in. Mudroom door, front door, basement bulkhead, garage. Which one isn't visible from the street? Basement, maybe. Then we move before they decide for us. Owen spoke up. "There's also the laundry window by the lower patio." Grant turned on him automatically. "That's too small. For you, maybe." Nora cut across them. "Stop. We are not improvising 3 separate plans." She looked at Elise. "Can you run?" Elise almost smiled at the absurdity. "In these shoes? Probably not with Grace. Grace is cancelled." Another shape moved past the window, closer now, just a shadow crossing the weak wash of the porch light. Grant grabbed the poker from the umbrella stand, then seemed to realize how ridiculous and desperate it looked, but he kept it anyway. Owen snatched his baseball bat from beside the mudroom cubbies where he had left it after a weekend tournament. The sight of her son holding a bat in his own house sent a sharp, private terror through Nora, so strong she had to steady herself against the wall for 1 second before she could move again. This was how families got marked forever, not by the crime itself, but by the image that stayed after. A child barefoot on tile, gripping aluminum like he understood what adults had allowed into his life. "Listen to me," she said, turning to Owen first, because she could not bear for him to become brave in the wrong way. "You do not swing unless somebody touches you or me. You run when I tell you. You do not become a hero tonight." His eyes flashed, hurt, and furious. "I'm not trying to be a hero." "Good," she said. "Then stay alive out of spite." That almost reached him. He gave one short nod. A sound came from the side entrance, not knocking this time, the careful metal test of a locked handle. Then again. Grant inhaled through his nose. Basement, now. They moved in a tight cluster through the dark kitchen, past the island, through the pantry hall. Nora could hear every detail too clearly. Elise's heels slipping once on the runner. Owen's breath. The soft clink of the bat touching the wall as he adjusted his grip. Grant's socked feet on hardwood. The house felt unfamiliar in the dimness, like a stage set after the audience had gone home and the props were revealed as props. At the basement door, Grant paused to listen. The handle at the side door rattled again, harder. A low male voice from outside, too muffled to make out words. Nora looked back down the hallway and caught her own reflection in the glass of a framed family photograph. Christmas 3 years earlier, matching sweaters. Martin in the center, like a monarch pretending to be a grandfather. She turned away so fast it felt like escaping a witness. Grant opened the basement door. Cool air rose up from below, smelling of detergent, cardboard, and the old concrete damp every expensive house tried and failed to disguise. He reached for the switch. Nora caught his wrist. No lights. He nodded. They descended carefully, hands sliding over the rail, the darkness broken only by the weak spill from upstairs and the blue-white of phone screens turned low. At the bottom, the familiar basement took on the uncanny clarity of fear. The treadmill folded against the wall, storage bins labeled holiday, the extra freezer, Owen's old science fair trifold still leaning behind paint cans, ridiculous and heartbreaking. A loud thud came from above. Not a door opening, more like a shoulder against wood. Elise flinched. "They're not supposed to do this," she whispered, as if saying it aloud could restore a system. "Men like Martin only do what other men have already forgiven," Nora said. She had not planned to say it. It arrived whole. Grant looked at her sharply, then toward the ceiling as another impact sounded overhead. This one from farther off, maybe the front. They crossed the basement in near darkness. The laundry room door stood open. Beyond it, the small lower patio window Owen had mentioned showed a slick square of night and the pale blur of rain on stone. Grant crouched by the bulkhead interior latch instead and tested it. It opened. "This is better." Nora moved closer. The narrow stairs up to the bulkhead were wet at the edges from seepage and scattered with a few dead leaves blown in at some earlier point. Above them, the outside doors were closed. Grant climbed 2 steps and pressed gently. Stuck. He pressed harder. Nothing. "Damn it. Locked from outside?" Elise asked. "Waited, maybe," he said. Or the frame swelled. Another thud from upstairs, louder now, and then the unmistakable crash of something breaking. Owen jerked toward the sound. Nora put one hand flat against his chest and held him there. She could feel his heart pounding through the cotton of his t-shirt. "No." His face twisted. "They're in the house. Which is why you do exactly what I say." Grant abandoned the bulkhead and went to the laundry window. He measured it with one look, then with his hands. "Owen can fit. Maybe Elise." "Nora, you're close." "I'm not sending my son out into the yard alone while men are walking the perimeter." "Then what?" Nora scanned the room, the shelves, the low windows near the ceiling on the opposite wall, the utility closet. Her mind snagged on something almost insulting in its banality. The old alarm panel Martin had insisted remain on a separate hardline years ago, for reliability. They had never used it because Grant upgraded everything else, but the panel was still mounted near the workbench, dead-looking and dusty. She crossed to it, wiped grime from the faceplate with her sleeve, and lifted the plastic cover. A dim red ready light glowed like a buried ember. Grant. He came over, stared, then laughed once in disbelief. "I forgot this was still active. Can it call out?" He hesitated. "If the line wasn't cut." She lifted her eyes to his. "Try." His fingers moved over the keypad with a speed that told her more about his childhood than he had ever openly admitted. He hit panic. Nothing happened for 1 second. Then a siren exploded through the basement so violently Elise cried out and Owen cursed, hands flying to his ears. The sound was enormous, metallic, humiliating to stealth, and immediately satisfying. It rang up through the house like accusation made mechanical. Above them, movement changed. Quick now. No more careful tests. Just footsteps, sharp and retreating or advancing, impossible to tell. Grant hit another button. It auto-calls Central if the line holds. Will Central call the police? Nora shouted over the alarm. Eventually. That is not a reassuring adverb. He was already at the laundry window, shoving the latch. The old frame grudgingly lifted. Cold, wet air rushed in, smelling of mud and clipped grass and the underside of leaves. Outside, the lower patio sat in darkness beneath the overhang, hidden from the street, unless someone came around the side yard. "Go," Grant said, "one at a time." "You first," Nora said. He looked at her like he wanted to argue, and knew time had become too expensive. He shoved out the screen, climbed onto the dryer, and wriggled through the opening with humiliating difficulty until his shoulders disappeared and then his legs. Owen gave a short, involuntary laugh through the terror. It vanished at once as another heavy sound came from overhead, closer now, maybe someone moving through the kitchen. Grant's hand reappeared from outside. "Nora," she turned to Owen. "You next." "No. Now is not the age for defiance. You next." "I can help Elise." The statement was so direct, so not childish, that Nora lost the second she might have used to fight him. She climbed onto the dryer, braced one hand on the cold metal frame, and forced herself through the window. Her coat caught. She yanked it free. Wet stone met her bare feet, shockingly cold. Grant grabbed her elbow and pulled her down under the sill. Rain kissed her hairline. The siren screamed on inside the house, flattening every other sound. Elise came next, awkward and swearing, nearly losing a shoe. Nora and Grant pulled her through together. Owen followed with the bat shoved ahead of him, landing badly on one knee and springing up before anyone could touch him. They crouched along the foundation under the overhang where the dark felt almost solid. Grant pointed toward the back hedge, through the gate, then along the neighbor's fence. Nora looked at the house. Upstairs, windows glowed faintly amber. No figures visible, but in the side yard, a flashlight beam snapped on, cutting through the rain, searching low. "Move," she whispered. They ran bent over along the stone edge of the patio, past the stacked teak chairs and the herb planters Nora had meant to replant in spring, through the gate at the back hedge where ivy snagged at her sleeve. The neighbor's yard beyond was soft with wet earth. Her feet sank cold into grass and mud. Elise stumbled again, muttering a breathless apology nobody had time to accept. Owen kept close to Nora's left side. Grant ranged slightly ahead, not leading exactly, more clearing the shape of a path because he was still a man who believed problems could be forced to align if he moved hard enough. Behind them, the flashlight beam swept across the hedge and away. A voice shouted from the street, then another. The alarm kept wailing, muffled now by walls and distance. They reached the rear fence line and followed it toward the neighboring property's side gate. Nora knew these houses, these lives measured in stone patios and school auctions and whispered opinions about landscapers. She had smiled over wine glasses with the woman who lived here, borrowed folding chairs once, complained about raccoons. The intimacy of suburban adjacency felt grotesque now, as if decency had always been one property line away from rot, and nobody had wanted to say it. At the side gate, Grant found it latched with a simple hook. They slipped through into the narrow passage between houses and out toward the street beyond. Not their street, but the parallel one that curved toward the elementary school parking lot. There, finally, the sound of the alarm was less than the sound of their breathing. Nora bent over, hands on her thighs, chest heaving, rain dripping from her jaw. Owen stood upright only because adrenaline was still doing the work of youth. Elise braced herself against a mailbox post. Grant scanned the street, empty except for a parked minivan and the reflective glisten of wet asphalt under sodium light. "We keep moving," he said. Nora straightened slowly. "To where?" He opened his mouth, but Elise answered first. "Not together." All three of them looked at her. She pushed wet hair off her forehead with shaking fingers. "I'm sorry, but if we stay in a group, Martin only needs one set of eyes on us. And if ethics or press starts landing blows before dawn, every camera in this county is going to want us in the same frame. I will not be photographed fleeing a family corruption nest with my lover and his wife." The last word came out with acid and shame mixed together. Owen's face shuddered. Grant looked away. Nora found, to her own disgust, that Elise was right. "You have somewhere to go?" Nora asked. Elise nodded once. "My sister's place in Stamford. Martin doesn't know her address. You trust that?" "More than this." She extended her phone to Nora. "Take photos of the notes." Nora did, fast, standing under the weak light by the mailbox while raindrops struck the screen and blurred the dates. January meetings. File numbers. A breakfast at the Harbor Club with Martin. A late-night session in Grant's office. One entry that made Nora's stomach knot. 2/11 T. M scared, said she copied everything. Another, 2/14 G. Furious, said B. Can handle retrieval if needed. Nora froze on the line. B. Ben. Elise saw the change in her face. What? Nora read the line again. Retrieval if needed. She looked up slowly. Did Ben ever work for Martin after he was cut out of the company? Grant answered before Elise could. Off and on. Nora turned to him. You told me he was out. He was out of the boardroom, Grant said. Not out of being useful. Owen stared at his father with naked contempt. You people talk like mob accountants. Grant flinched. Elise took back her phone. I need to go. Nora looked at her. If you disappear now, Martin can still say you panicked and fabricated half of this. Then I won't disappear, Elise said. She swallowed, looked at Owen once more, then at Nora. I'm going to a reporter in the morning, state level, not local. I don't know whether I'm doing it because I've grown a conscience or because I'm trying to survive. Maybe those become the same thing under pressure. Nora believed her just enough for it to hurt. Elise stepped away from the mailbox, then stopped. For what it's worth, she said to Nora, not looking at Grant. I never thought he'd leave you. That was part of the seduction. Men like him betray in installments. Then she turned and walked down the wet street in heels that clicked, once, twice, before she pulled them off and carried them, disappearing into the dark with her coat open and her spine rigid. No one spoke for several seconds after she was gone. The neighborhood held its breath with them. Far off, at last, sirens. Real ones now, or at least louder than imagination. Nora folded her arms against the cold. Her mind kept circling that line in Elise's notes. B. Can handle retrieval if needed. Ben with a subcontractor doing collections. Ben near the edges whenever dirt needed a civilian face. Grant rubbed rain from his brow and said quietly, We need to decide now. She looked at him. His hair was plastered damp against his forehead. His shirt clung to his shoulders. He had never looked less polished, less curated, less like the man other people mistook for stability. No, she said. I need to decide. You have spent years deciding for everybody. He took that without protest. Owen shifted closer to Nora, no longer trying to hide whose side he had chosen. In the body language alone. Mom, he said, very quietly, please don't let him talk us into another house. The sentence landed with brutal precision. Not another night, another structure, another story, another room where power rearranged the furniture and called it protection. Nora looked down the rain-dark street, toward the school lot, toward whatever came next. The story had widened and narrowed all at once. No longer who slept with whom, or even only who profited. Now it was about sequence, evidence, distance, which betrayal was actionable first. The sirens grew louder. Somewhere behind them, perhaps only a block away, doors would soon open onto uniforms, statements, controlled lies. Martin would already be shaping his version. The old reflex rose in Nora for one poisoned second. Go contain the damage, speak carefully, save what can be saved. Then Owen's hand found the sleeve of her coat, just lightly, and the reflex died. We're not going back there, she said. Grant's face closed, not in anger this time, but in recognition. He knew the sentence was bigger than the house. Then where? He asked. Nora took out her phone. One bar had returned. Enough, maybe. For a choice. She stared at Ben's thread, at Dana Rusk's number from weeks ago, at the unknown sender, at the web of men and documents and partial truths converging before dawn. Then she lifted her head and made the first decision that belonged entirely to her. We go to the only person in this county who charges by the hour to distrust all of you equally. We go to the only person in this county who charges by the hour to distrust all of you equally. Grant stared at her for one beat, rain tracking down the side of his face, and then gave the smallest, bleakest nod, because even in the middle of collapse, he knew exactly who she meant. Dana Rusk had a second-floor office over a bankrupt travel agency in White Plains, and the kind of professional reputation that made rich men call her shrill in public and indispensable in private. She handled divorces, emergency custody fights, asset freezes, reputational fires, and the particular American tragedy of families with too much money and too little shame. She also, Nora remembered now with a strange pulse of gratitude, asked hard questions before she offered comfort. Owen looked between them. It's 10 at night. That's why she charges more after 9, Nora said. Her fingers were cold and stiff on the phone screen as she found Dana's number and hit call. It rang 4 times. Then Dana answered, voice thick with sleep but not confusion. Rusk, it's Nora Vale. A pause, sheets rustling. Then Dana's tone sharpened instantly into full wakefulness. You sound outdoors. I am. I need somewhere safe, and I need legal advice before dawn. Another pause. Smaller this time, the size of a professional weighing risk. Are you in immediate physical danger? Nora looked down the dark street toward the glow of police lights beginning to smear the far wet intersection. Possibly. Also, I may possess evidence tied to county corruption, and my father-in-law has sent men to my house. Dana exhaled once. That is a terrible elevator pitch, but it got my attention. Can you get to my office? Yes. Front entrance is locked. Park in the alley by the dentist's dumpster. I'll meet you there in 25 minutes. Nora almost laughed from relief, though it came out brittle. Thank you. Do not thank lawyers in advance, Dana said. Turn off location sharing on every device you own, and if your husband is with you, tell him I'm billing him in my heart. The line went dead. Owen, listening, said, I like her. Grant did not. That alone made Nora trust Dana more. The question of transportation arrived immediately after. They had no car. The family SUV was back at the house, their other vehicle in the garage they had fled, and calling a rideshare under Grant's or Nora's name felt idiotic now that every electronic trace seemed hostile. Grant took out his phone. I can call a car service from a corporate account. Nora's answer was immediate. No. Dad doesn't monitor every. No. He closed his mouth. Owen said, We can walk to the train station lot and grab a cab there. Grant looked at him. At this hour? At this hour there are 3 drunk hedge fund guys and at least 1 cab every 10 minutes, Owen said. I've seen civilization, Dad. Even now, Nora felt the sting of how much her son had been learning in glances while adults congratulated themselves on protecting him. They moved again, away from the street, and into the narrow shortcut behind the elementary school, skirting the black fence around the playground where raindrops clung to the monkey bars like dull beads. Wet mulch, cold asphalt, the sour metallic smell rising from storm drains, the distant wail of sirens behind them growing, and then dispersing into separate directions. Grant kept scanning over his shoulder. Nora noticed he still carried the fireplace poker, absurd and grim, tucked along his leg beneath his coat like a bad prop in a civic tragedy. Owen still had the bat. Nobody mentioned either object. At the train lot, under sodium lights that flattened everything into exhausted yellow, 3 cabs did in fact sit idling beside the curb. One driver smoked with his window cracked, watching rain stipple the hood. Nora felt the bizarre surge of gratitude people feel for the ordinary infrastructure of escape. She opened the back door of the first cab before Grant could speak and slid in beside Owen. Grant hesitated outside just long enough for her to think, irrationally, that he might choose not to come. Then he got in front. White Plains, Nora said. North Broadway, near Maine. We'll give the exact address on the way. The driver glanced at them in the mirror, taking in damp clothes, bare feet, Owen's bat, Grant's face. He was old enough to know when curiosity was an unaffordable luxury. Meters running, he said, and pulled away. For the first 5 minutes, nobody spoke. The cab smelled like pine deodorizer over old cigarettes, and the damp wool of a life spent in cars. Wipers swung back and forth with relentless patience. Outside, the county passed in pieces Nora had known for years and never really seen. All-night gas stations glowing in emptied intersections, a diner sign buzzing over an almost full parking lot, low-brick municipal buildings crouched dark beside wet flags, chain pharmacies, sleeping office parks, the soft American sprawl, where corruption wore khakis and chaired nonprofit breakfasts. Owen leaned his head back against the seat but did not close his eyes. His bat rested upright between his knees. He looked older in the cab's dim light, which terrified Nora because it was partly true. Grant finally spoke without turning around. When we get there, you need to let me explain the parts Dana will otherwise infer wrong. Interesting phrasing, Nora said. Most innocent people say truth, not parts. He took that and kept going anyway. Ben was used for retrieval work a couple of times. Documents, phones, cash drop cleanup. Dad trusted him for ugly errands because he assumed nobody would take him seriously enough to remember him later. Owen made a low sound of disgust. Grant went on, voice tighter. I am not saying Ben hurt Talia. I'm saying if Martin told him there was a situation to stabilize, he might have involved himself without asking the question that mattered. Nora looked out the rain-streaked window, past reflections of traffic lights smeared red and green across the glass. And you? She asked. Which question didn't you ask? He did not answer immediately. The driver adjusted the radio lower without being asked, as if even he sensed words were becoming dangerous. I asked the wrong one, Grant said at last. I kept asking whether this could be contained. Not whether it should. Nora, let the silence sit. He deserved it. More than that, she needed it. Anger had by now changed texture inside her. It was no longer the hot, clean rage of catching him with Elise. It had thickened into something older and more female, a long sediment of humiliations and accommodations, and moments she had called practical, because admitting what they really were would have broken the architecture sooner. The affairs were filth. The corruption was rot. But underneath both was entitlement so ordinary it had almost hidden itself in manners. The belief that he could decide what truths entered her life, and when. She put one hand over Owen's on the bat handle. He turned his palm up and laced their fingers together without looking at her. The gesture nearly undid her. White plains at night looked less glamorous than daytime ambition promised. The office corridor above the dead travel agency smelled of dusty radiator heat and copier toner. Dana Rusk opened the outer door wearing black slacks, loafers, and a navy sweater over a white t-shirt. Her hair pulled into the kind of hasty knot that still made her look more controlled than most people at noon. She took in the three of them in one sweeping glance, then stepped aside. Inside. And if anybody followed you, I hope they enjoy parking enforcement. Her office was small, neat, and aggressively unsentimental. Metal filing cabinets, one framed degree, a ficus plant clinging to life out of professional obligation, a narrow conference table with mismatched chairs, no inspirational sayings, no softness beyond a box of tissues placed not within easy reach, but where a person would have to choose to ask. Nora loved her instantly for that too. Dana locked the door, set a kettle on in the tiny break nook, then came back with a yellow legal pad. Phones on the table, all of them. We're going to start with the assumption that none of you understands digital hygiene as well as you think you do. They complied. Dana separated the phones several feet apart, switched off Bluetooth and Wi-Fi where she could, powered one entirely down, then nodded once. Good enough for tonight. Now, I want the shortest true version first. Nora glanced at Grant, then at Owen, then began. She told it plainly. The study, Elise. The recording, Martin's voice. The land scheme, Ben's warning. The anonymous text. Men at the house. Elise's notes. The alarm. The escape. Dana wrote nothing for the first 5 minutes. She just watched Nora with the absolute stillness of a person sorting liability from performance. When Nora finished, Dana turned to Grant. Which portion of that are you likely to contest under oath? Grant held her gaze. I had an affair with Elise. I was in the room on the recording. I knew the ownership structure was layered to avoid scrutiny. I intended to manage, not stop, the vote sequencing. I did not harm Talia Mercer, and I do not know where she is. Dana nodded like a surgeon, noting that at least the patient knew where the wound was. And your father? Capable of using intimidation to suppress exposure. That is lawyerly enough to be true. I hate it. She finally wrote a few words. Then she looked at Owen. And you? What do you know that your parents are too compromised to remember matters? Owen blinked, startled, then sat up a little straighter. Grandpa asked me about my mom meeting a lawyer weeks ago. Dad once had a call in the car where Grandpa asked if the Mercer problem had gone away. Dad said not to talk about it in front of me. Also, he glanced at Grant, then pushed through. My dad lies in a way that sounds calm when he's scared. Nora saw Grant absorb that like a slap he believed he deserved. Dana, to her credit, treated the statement as evidence, not family theater. Useful, she said. Thank you. She stood, poured hot water into paper cups with tea bags, and slid one toward Nora, one toward Owen, none toward Grant. Here is the immediate legal landscape. 1. If Talia Mercer is genuinely missing, and there's any chance her disappearance intersects with public corruption, then this is no longer a family containment exercise. 2. Your father-in-law's tactics tonight suggest consciousness of exposure. 3. If any of you go first to local law enforcement without preparation, the information may leak sideways before it moves upward. That could destroy evidence, coordinate stories, or turn you into the headline instead of the case. Owen said. So what? We just sit here? Dana met his eyes. No, we sequence. She turned to Nora. Do you still have the recording? Nora took out the spare phone and placed it on the table. Dana did not touch it with her bare hand. She used a pen to nudge it toward herself, then looked at Grant. Unlock. He did. Dana played enough to hear Martin's voice. Enough to hear Grant. Enough to know this was not domestic exaggeration. She stopped it before the room could fully relive the scene. We need redundant copies, offline and separately held. We also need contemporaneous statements from each of you before memory gets contaminated by panic or strategic revision. And Ben? Nora asked. Dana's expression did not change, but her pen stopped moving. What about him? Nora told her about the anonymous text and Elise's note about B, handling retrieval. Dana wrote a second line beneath the first. Ben may be witness, participant, or decoy. At this hour, he is all three until ruled otherwise. Grant rubbed his wet hands together slowly, a small, repetitive motion that made him look younger and more damaged than she had ever seen him. You think Martin sent the anonymous message? Dana considered. Possibly, but manipulation that sophisticated could also come from someone trying to break the family trust structure from the inside. People like Martin do not create loyalty. They create waiting lists. The line landed. Nora thought of everyone orbiting the old man. Secretaries who lasted 2 years and left with pinched faces, contractors who laughed too hard at his jokes, council members who hated him in private and still took meetings, sons raised in his weather, daughters-in-law assessed like property acquisitions. Waiting lists, indeed. Dana opened a locking drawer, took out a cheap digital recorder, and placed it in the center of the table. We're making statements now. Then I'm contacting a former federal prosecutor who owes me a favor and dislikes county developers on moral and aesthetic grounds. After that, Nora and Owen are going to a secure hotel under my firm account. Not yours. Not yours either, she added to Grant before he could speak. You are not sharing a room. You are not talking unsupervised. And if you try to reconcile before breakfast, I will charge double out of principle. Owen almost smiled into his tea. Grant did not. What about me? He asked. Dana looked at him for a long moment. You are a compromised witness, a possible target, and a possible defendant. Congratulations on your range. For tonight, you stay where I can reach you and where your father cannot put a sympathetic cousin on the door. I know a retired judge with a carriage house and insomnia. Grant opened his mouth. Dana lifted one finger. That was not a request. She switched on the recorder and nodded to Nora first. As Nora spoke into the small machine, hearing her own voice turned factual and time-stamped, she felt the night shift again. This was no longer the hour of discovery. It was the hour when stories became records, and records began to outlive the people who feared them. She described the study, the kiss, the recording, Martin's call, the porchmen, the escape. Dana asked precise questions that cut through emotion without denying it. What time did you arrive? Which pocket held the phone? Did Grant ever use the phrase redirect before tonight? Did Martin threaten you explicitly or imply consequence? Did Elise appear frightened when she arrived, or merely exposed? Nora answered each one. Then Grant made his statement. Listening to him was like watching a man lay bricks around his own conscience, while finally admitting there had once been a door. He did not confess to crimes he had not been asked about. He also did not lie outright. That, Nora thought, might be the closest he could currently come to integrity. He admitted knowledge, presence, intent to protect the deal, fear of his father, belief that Mercer had been pressured but not, to his knowledge, harmed. The careful phrase "to his knowledge" rang in the office like a warning bell. Dana heard it too. She wrote something hard on the pad. Owen went last. His statement was short, blunt, and terrible in its ordinary details. Grandpa asking about Mom's lunches, Dad's speakerphone call, men outside, Mom saying not to be a hero, the bat. When he finished, Dana turned off the recorder and sat back. For the first time all night, she looked tired. Here is where we are, she said. By morning, one of three things will happen. Mercer surfaces alive, which narrows this to coercion, corruption, and obstruction. Mercer is found harmed, which makes tonight look like prelude. Or Mercer remains absent, which will let every bad actor in this county write fiction around her silence. Nobody spoke. Outside the office windows, rain had thinned to a slick whisper against glass. Somewhere in the hallway, pipes knocked once. The kettle in the nook had gone quiet. Dana checked her watch. We are close enough to dawn that the distinction between late and early is now philosophical. Nora, I need to know whether you intend to cooperate against Martin if it costs your marriage, your house, and likely your son's relationship with half his bloodline. Nora looked at Owen. He was exhausted, eyes shadowed, hair damp and curling at the edges, still holding himself upright because the night had not yet offered permission to collapse. Then she looked at Grant. He did not plead. That was almost kind. She understood, suddenly, that this was the real threshold. Not the affair. Not the porch. Not even the notes. This. The formal willingness to let the truth have material consequences in a culture that trained women to absorb them privately instead. Yes, she said. Her own voice sounded calmer than she felt. Even if it takes everything? Dana asked. Nora swallowed. It already did. Dana gave one curt nod, as though a box had been checked inside a larger, colder machine. Then Grant's powered-down phone, forgotten among the spread-out devices, began vibrating against the conference table anyway. Not ringing. Vibrating. Again. And again. They all stared at it. Dana frowned, reached over, and turned its screen up without touching the sides. Emergency override notifications were bleeding through as the device rebooted itself from some forced system restart. News alerts. Breaking local. County planner Talia Mercer found alive at street. Catherine's intake unit after apparent overnight drop-off. Sources say Mercer sought protection and named multiple officials in sealed statement. Nora felt every person in the room stop breathing in a different way. Dana looked up first, eyes gone sharp as wire. Well, she said quietly, Now the race starts. Now the race starts. Nobody moved for half a second, as if motion itself might choose a side too early. Then Dana was already in action. Legal pad shoved aside, one hand reaching for her office landline, the other for Grant's phone so she could read the alert without contaminating whatever chain of custody she had decided existed in the room. "Nobody touches anything," she said, voice suddenly flatter, colder, all comfort stripped away. "Nora, I need the name of every reporter you trust not to sell you for access. Grant, I need the name of every person your father calls before sunrise when he wants a story bent. Owen, I need you to stay seated and not become the most honest person in the room unless I ask." Owen, somehow, nodded. Nora felt the blood rushing in her ears, the strange surge that came when dread and relief collided so hard they almost resembled energy. Alive. Talia Mercer was alive. The word changed the moral weather of the night without clearing it. Alive did not mean safe. Alive did not mean truthful. Alive did not mean the machinery had failed. But alive meant there would be a human voice at the center now, instead of a vacuum into which men could pour whatever version best protected them. Dana dialed, listened, cut the call, dialed again. "Voicemail," she muttered. "Of course he sleeps like an innocent man." She looked up at Nora. "Reporter." Nora named Leah Colfax at the state investigative desk, a woman she had met twice at charity events, and once at a panel on municipal accountability, where Leah had smiled like she could smell hypocrisy from 30 feet away. Dana wrote the name. "Good. She hates developers with a spiritual intensity." Grant said. "My father calls Hal Brenner first, outside counsel. Then a county deputy executive named Paul Corbin. Then usually his PR fixer if there's press. But if Mercer has given a sealed statement, he'll start political before public." Dana wrote those down too. "And who, in this fine republic of cowardice, might have standing to get in front of sealed before it leaks?" Grant answered without hesitation. "Corbin, maybe the district attorney if local got wind. But if Mercer went to state or federal through intake, Dad's first move will be to create confusion about jurisdiction." Dana's eyes flicked up with reluctant approval. "There's the expensive education." She finally got someone on the line. "Marty, it's Dana. I'm invoking old favors and your irrational fondness for chaos. I need contact with someone who can verify whether County Planner Talia Mercer is under protective interview and whether local actors are already trying to interfere." She listened, impatience tapping once in her jaw. "Yes. Now. Because dawn is when men start deleting." Another pause. "Good. Call me back on the hard line only." She hung up and turned to Nora. "Next piece. If Mercer is talking, your leverage just shifted. The recording matters more because it corroborates pattern. Elisa's notes matter because they establish pre-existing fear and sequence. Your porch visitors matter because they show consciousness of exposure. But this also means Martin will move from intimidation to triage. He will decide what he can lose. Grant spoke so quietly Nora almost missed it. "And he'll decide who?" Dana did not soften. "Yes." Nora watched Grant absorb that, watched the flicker of old knowledge cross his face. Not surprise, but recognition so deep it was nearly inheritance. For all his polish, for all his careful adult camouflage, part of him had grown up in a house where love and expendability sat too close together. She should have felt satisfaction. Instead, she felt tired in a place deeper than sleep. "What does he sacrifice first?" she asked. Grant looked at the table rather than at her. "Elise if he can. Ben if he needs a deniable operative. Me if Mercer has anything direct with my name on it. He'll protect himself and the company shell before the Suns." Owen stared at his father, expression gone flat with dawning comprehension. "You knew that, and still worked for him?" It was the kind of question that only a son could ask in a way that made adulthood seem like a disease. Grant lifted his eyes. "Yes. No justification. No speech. Just yes." The honesty of it landed harder than excuses would have. Dana's landline rang. She picked up instantly. "Rusk." She listened for nearly a minute, and the room narrowed around the silence. Nora watched the muscles in Dana's face give away almost nothing except concentration. Finally, Dana said, "Understood. No, do not put that in writing yet. I'll have material for you within the hour." She hung up. Mercer is alive, coherent, and under state-level interview with a protection request pending. She alleges pressure tied to the Rivergate redevelopment, improper parcel concealment, and attempted retrieval of copied documents after she refused to revise sequence language. Dana looked directly at Grant. She named Martin, she named Elise, and she named a male intermediary she does not fully identify. The room went still again. Nora felt her own thoughts click into new alignment. Ben. Maybe Grant. Maybe someone else. In rich families, men were always discovering that vague language bought them freedom until a woman survived long enough to become specific. Has she named you? Nora asked Grant. He shook his head once. Not yet. The not yet was honest enough to break her heart a little, not because she still wanted to protect him, but because this was what remained of intimacy between them now. The capacity to hear precisely how much danger lived inside 2 words. Dana rose. We are moving. She handed Nora a legal envelope and a cheap hotel pen. Write down every detail you remember that has not yet been spoken aloud, no matter how small. Sensory details too. Smells, times, exact phrases, whether the men on the porch wore insignia, anything. To Grant, she said, You are calling Ben from my office line, on speaker, and if he lies, I want to hear his breathing when he does it. To Owen. T. Bathroom. Wash your face. Exhaustion is when people agree to things they would hate in daylight. Owen stood, looking insulted and grateful at once, and disappeared toward the narrow restroom. Grant remained seated for a second, then stood as if gravity had increased. Dana pushed the landline toward him. Dial. Ben answered on the second ring, voice clipped, already awake. Yeah? Grant's hand tightened on the receiver. It's me. That explains why the universe suddenly feels smug. Dana cut in before the brothers could do what brothers do, which was use history as a weapon until facts bled out. Dana Rusk. You're on speaker. Consider false statements tonight a future invoice. Ben paused. Then, more serious. Okay, Dana said. Talia Mercer is alive and speaking. I need a direct answer. Did Martin ever ask you to retrieve documents, a phone, or a bag connected to Mercer? The silence was not long, but it was fatal. Nora stopped writing. Grant shut his eyes once. Ben exhaled through his nose. He asked me to go to a parking turnout off Saxon Mill and pick up a satchel from a car if it was there. Nora felt Owen return from the hall and stop in the doorway behind her, towel in hand, listening. Dana's pen moved. Was it? No. What was there? The car. Driver's side open, purse on the seat, no satchel, no person. Ben's voice had gone rougher, stripped of defensive charm. I called Martin back. He told me to leave. Said county would handle it. I did. Nora stared at the legal envelope and saw instead a woman's car on a dark roadside. Door open, purse left behind like punctuation. Why didn't you tell anyone? She asked. Ben answered her directly. Because I knew enough to be scared and not enough to be brave. The line sat in the room, ugly and believable. Dana asked, Did you touch anything? No. Did Grant know? Another pause. Grant opened his eyes. Answer. Ben did. Not that night. Martin said keep Grant out because he was already making things worse by trying to manage Elise. Grant looked physically ill, not because Ben had implicated him. Nora thought, but because Martin had kept a secret from him in a category reserved for sons who had become usable but not trusted. And later? Dana asked. Later Dad said, it was a misunderstanding. Mercer had had a panic episode. State compliance would reassign her quietly, and the less anyone spoke the better. I knew it smelled wrong. I also knew I was broke, divorced, and one favor away from being back in his good graces. Ben laughed once, crushed and bitter. You want the noble version? I don't have one. Dana's voice stayed hard. Do you have anything else? A text thread, with him asking for the pickup. I never deleted it because part of me wanted insurance and part of me is too lazy to clean my phone. Dana looked at Grant. Get that preserved, Grant said. Ben, send nothing to anyone until Dana gives you a protocol, and do not answer Dad. Ben was quiet. Then, softly enough that the old ache between brothers was suddenly visible, he said, he already called, 21 times. After Dana ended the call, the office seemed smaller. Dawn had begun smudging the windows from black to charcoal. Nora's handwriting on the legal envelope looked jagged, slanted, almost not hers. She wrote anyway. The smell of whiskey in the study. The exact angle of Elise's knee under Grant's hand. Martin saying the girl from planning. The porchman's shaved head. The way Grant shook only after the SUV engine turned off. The line from Elise's notes about retrieval. The old alarm panel's red light. Her own bare feet on the patio stone. Writing it all down made it less like memory and more like evidence, which was good for survival and bad for the soul. Dana made 3 separate calls over the next 40 minutes, each one carving the night into procedure. One to the former federal prosecutor, one to a secure digital forensics contact, one to Leah Colfax, whose sleepy skepticism vanished the moment Dana said Rivergate and Mercer in the same sentence. By the time the office clock crawled past 5:30, the world outside had begun its weekday impersonation of order. Delivery trucks, Commuter headlights, coffee shops turning on open signs as though the county were not quietly reassigning its loyalties before breakfast. Dana finally sat again and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Here's the path. Leah gets enough to prevent a burial, but not the full recording yet. The prosecutor contact gets the existence of the recording, Elise's contemporaneous notes, and Ben's preservation obligation through me. Nora and Owen disappear into a hotel under my firm account. Then by noon we seek emergency protective orders and asset restraint before Martin moves money. Grant, you either cooperate early and fully, or you spend the next 2 years learning the difference between family privilege and individual exposure. Grant did not argue. I'll cooperate. Nora looked at him. She believed he meant it. She did not know whether meaning it after midnight erased enough of what meaning it earlier might have saved. Dana turned to Owen. Your school will become a battlefield by lunchtime. Friends' parents, trustees, coaches, everyone with a mouth. Do not answer texts. Do not post anything. If anyone asks how you're doing, say you're with counsel. People hate children who sound litigated, which is an advantage. Owen actually smiled, faintly and for the first time without effort. Then his face folded again as the cost of the sentence settled back onto him. Nora felt it too. Whatever came next, Owen's life had already been divided into before this and after this. That was one of the things no adult ever confessed when saying children are resilient. Resilience is just adaptation with scar tissue. Dana's printer whirred suddenly to life, startling them all. She crossed to it, retrieved a single page, scanned it, and handed it to Nora. Leah moves fast. It was a draft web headline. Not yet live, but queued. County planner alleges pressure in Rivergate approval. Sources point to Vail Network. Not Martin, not Grant. Vail Network. Big enough to wound, vague enough to spread. Nora stared at the family name turned into a searchable infection. Once this goes, Dana said, nothing returns to private. It already wasn't private, Nora replied. No, Dana said, but it was still deniable. That's a different country. At 6:12, Grant's phone lit again. This time the call came through on the hardline transfer because Dana had allowed that single number past whatever makeshift perimeter she'd built. Martin. Everyone looked at Grant. He looked at Nora. She felt, in that brief eye contact, every year between them compressed into one impossible question. Who are you when the father who made you finally calls in public? Dana answered it for both of them. Take it. Speaker. Grant picked up. Dad. Martin's voice came through, composed, almost gentle. The gentleness made Nora's skin crawl. You've had a dramatic night. Grant said nothing. Martin continued. I'm hearing idiotic rumors. Mercer was unstable. Elise is panicking. Ben is, predictably, contaminating things by existing. I assume by now your wife has mistaken noise for evidence and is enjoying the attention. Nora closed her eyes once, not from hurt but from old recognition. There he was. The real liturgy. Diminish the woman. Pathologize the witness. Degrade the weaker son. Invite the stronger one home. Grant's face changed as he listened. Not dramatically, just slowly, like stone taking weather. No, he said. Martin paused. No what? Grant swallowed. Nora could hear it in the mic. No more of this. Another pause, longer now. You're tired, Martin said. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Grant's voice shook once and then steadied. You sent men to my house. You used Ben to touch a missing woman's scene. You told me I was managing process while you made me party to a lie I didn't even fully understand. Martin's response came back sharpened, the softness gone. Careful. Grant looked not at the table, not at Dana, but at Owen. His son stood very still beside Nora, eyes fixed on him, every teenage grievance and every childish hope stripped down to witness. Something in Grant finally gave way under that gaze. No, he said again, and this time the word came out like a lifetime's overdue fracture. You be careful. Martin did not raise his voice. He made it smaller, which was worse. You think they won't bury you with me? Grant's answer took only a second. Maybe they will. Nora saw the truth of him then, not redeemed, not noble, but finally separated from the childhood terror that had been puppeteering his adulthood in silk ties. But Owen doesn't go down to keep your name polished. Martin was silent. Then, with naked contempt, your mother was right about you, always soft where it counted. The sentence hit like a blade drawn from a much older drawer. Grant went completely still. Nora had met Eleanor Vail only twice before she died. Beautiful, underfed, expertly mannered, with the faraway look of women who had learned to leave rooms without moving. Grant had never spoken much of her. Now, Nora understood why. Grant's face emptied of almost everything except a grief so old it looked architectural. Maybe, he said. But she left. And I finally know why. He hung up. Nobody in the room moved for several seconds. Dana, who had probably heard every variation of family cruelty billable by the hour, said nothing. Owen looked at his father with shock, pity, anger, and something like reluctant understanding, all fighting for space. Nora herself felt no reconciliation, no cinematic rush of love restored. What she felt was more sober and more brutal. The man she had married had just told the truth to the one person who built him crooked. That mattered. It did not fix anything. It mattered. Dana cleared her throat gently, the first gentle sound she had made all night. That call, she said, will age interestingly, if subpoenaed. And with that, the room laughed, not because anything was funny, but because bodies sometimes revolt against unbearable seriousness with noise. Even Grant laughed once, brokenly. Dawn moved fully into the windows. Outside, the county was waking into scandal. Leah's story went live at 6:41. By 6:48, Martin's office had issued a statement condemning rumor and pledging cooperation. By 7:05, social media had Elise in a red circle, Grant in an old campaign photo, Martin at a ribbon cutting, Ben in a courthouse parking lot from 3 years earlier, all the usual cannibal machinery of public appetite, already chewing on context like gristle. Dana booked the hotel. Protective orders were drafted. The recording was copied to 3 secure destinations. Ben, now under instruction, forwarded the preserved text thread showing Martin's request to retrieve the satchel before county notices the car. Elise, for reasons mixed between guilt and self-preservation, sent her notes and agreed to counsel. And Nora, sitting in the small, hard chair beside Dana's conference table as morning turned ordinary outside, understood that there would be no clean ending because truth never arrived without invoices. By choosing exposure, she would likely lose the house, half the friends, the last polite versions of family holidays, and whatever fantasy Owen still had, that adulthood contained sturdy heroes. By staying near the process, Grant might spare his son some future damage, but only by stepping into public disgrace and possibly charges. Ben, in finally telling the truth, guaranteed he would not recover whatever thin path back to the family fortune he had spent years circling. Elise might save herself by cooperating and still become the face voters remembered when they wanted a woman to blame for men's architecture. Martin would not fall cleanly either. Men like him rarely did. They shed layers. They poisoned timelines. They called in debts. But for the first time since Nora had seen her husband laugh behind the study door, the direction of force had changed. The morning did not feel hopeful. It felt irreversible. Dana stood and gathered folders into a stack. "Time to move," she said. Nora rose, legs aching, mind buzzing with caffeine she had never actually drunk. Owen picked up his backpack. Grant reached instinctively for Nora's coat from the chair back and held it out. She took it. Their fingers touched for less than a second. No spark. No reconciliation. Just history. Exhausted and still warm. "I'll testify," he said quietly. "For her alone now. Not for Dana or the room or the law." Nora looked at him. He meant it. She believed that too. Belief, she was discovering, did not always come with forgiveness. "Then do it before your father reminds you who you used to be," she said. He nodded once. Owen stood between them without meaning to, the exact geography of consequence. When they stepped into the hallway, the building smelled like stale heat and somebody's burnt coffee from the office below. The world beyond the stairwell door had already started moving at commuter speed, as if no family had shattered in the night, as if no woman had survived long enough to threaten a county's preferred lies. Nora put one hand on the rail and started down, her son just ahead of her, her husband somewhere behind. She did not know what the court would do, what the press would uncover next, how much money Martin could still hide, whether Owen would ever fully forgive any of them, or whether Grant's cooperation would save him or merely make him useful to a different machine. She only knew that the house on the hill was no longer a home, that love had failed where evidence had not, and that by noon, half the county would be arguing about corruption, while a woman named Talia Mercer tried to remember how to live with having been right. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street shone clean in the lie that follows every storm.